You're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. It's more fun to believe. Third year bonus. And here we go. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're having an enjoyable time. I hope you're enjoying whatever it is you're doing. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I don't know why I always say that out of order, but it doesn't really matter, I suppose. This is Ryan Singer. I'm here for another third year bonus of the Paranormal podcast, Me and Paranormal You. So what's interesting is, excuse me, not that long ago I was alerted about this book I was reading. I thought it was written by Alan Watts. It's not written by Alan Watts. It's written by Alan Watts, but not the Alan Watts I thought it was. The name of the book is UFO Visitation, Preparing for the 21st Century. And it's, an interesting book that was written, I believe, in 97. Anyway, I bought this at a bookstore, and I've been reading it, and it's fascinating because of many of the ideas and concepts that are in this book that are kind of looking toward the future are now happening in certain ways, right? They're unfolding these I guess pseudo predictions of a kind are kind of coming out. I got a new microphone. I hope it sounds better. I'm truly hoping it does sound better. If you can even tell the difference. I want to read you an excerpt from this book. I also have a pop microphone shield. Pop shield. Anyway, it ties into so much stuff that's going on in my brain right now about, universal consciousness, cosmic consciousness, etc., and the connectivity of all things through consciousness. He talks about etheric vibrations. Nether is like the ether, but it's like the consciousness ether. Anyway, and he's referencing a study by a scientist named Pearson, I believe it's Pearson, who was kind of talking about cosmons. And cosmons are like, much, much tinier than, electrons and protons and all that kind of stuff, like the foundation of the actual universe, like the actual bottom level of the building blocks. Anyway, let's get into just a short little excerpt here, and then I'm going to read maybe a couple of short little excerpts here, because I think they're interesting and fascinating. However, if this network is like the brain, it must be able to store information and learn, to ingest information as well as transport it. Therefore, it should be able to manipulate its wave actions to constructive purposes. We are seeing here a vast consciousness underlying the material world which we observe. In the past, many thinkers have suspected the existence of this consciousness, but Pearson's theories show us how it can communicate with the world of matter and energy as we see it all about us. Even more to the point, he indicates how our minds can be linked into and receiving information from the immense superhighway of intelligence flowing back and forth through the universe. I'm fascinated by this, but I'm also like, at the same time, I'm having this thing like, well, maybe I should change the way I breathe when I'm reading. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been walking down the street and been like, I haven't figured out how to walk yet. What's the most effective way for me to be walking? I haven't figured that out yet. Maybe I need to walk differently than I walk now. I still don't know how to get on an escalator. Getting off of the escalator is a little easier, but am I the only one out there? Am I the only one out there who still has a mild panic attack every time they have to step onto an escalator, even though I've done it my whole life? I play this little game where I try to could I do this closing my eyes? Or should I just forget that I'm getting on an escalator and see what happens? See if it's natural. I try to convince myself that getting on an escalator is natural. As if there's anything natural about it. So yeah, I guess that kind of ties into, I don't know how to breathe yet. I have a deviated septum, which makes it difficult to breathe through my nose. I don't know if you knew that about me. All this stems from some guy commenting on one of the episodes about, you don't know how to breathe, man. You need to learn how to breathe. It's like, bro, I've been living my entire life breathing every day. Every minute of every day I've been alive, I've been breathing. You're telling me I don't know how to breathe. It's an involuntary thing usually. Except when I'm trying to meditate or whatever, calm myself down. Anyway, what am I even talking about right now? Let's get into more of what Alan Watts is writing about. I mean, because it's interesting because we talk about, owls, the screen images of these things, are they aliens? Are they owls? Are they aliens that are replaced by images of owls? Owls show up a bunch, even ravens. He talks about the material world, the mental world, and then there's the, etheric world, connecting all of these things. And when you get into it, you start to realize, okay, well, if these scientific theories are correct that Pearson was postulating back in the day, and if consciousness is the foundation of all reality, then, psychic abilities, precognition, etc., all the different clairs, none of this is crazy. None of it's wild. None of it's that hard to understand. And if alien intelligence has already tapped into all this stuff, it makes sense why they can communicate with us. And it can also explain how certain people can train their minds to drop the barrier between their individual consciousness and the universal consciousness, tap into psychic abilities, etc. And some people are just born naturally better at it. It makes sense to me when I think about it and when I read it. I don't know how it goes for you. There's lots of interesting experiments that they talk about that have been conducted, but it's like, I'm not a scientist, From these late 20th century ideas of what makes up the basics of our universe, we can postulate a cosmon or Noether continuum, which, because of its essential balance, could have been created from the void by separating nothing into two equal and opposite halves. In Genesis, we read that in the beginning, earth, i.e. matter, was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. This deep must refer to the void before the creation of cosmons, because the electromagnetic ether was a natural consequence of their creation, as were the electromagnetic EM waves of light that enabled the developing universe to be seen. This act of creating two almost equal and opposite cosmon halves could be what it meant by, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Excuse me. I always find it interesting and, I guess pretty fascinating when scientific studies, or studies that are at least leaning toward the scientific, reference literature, stories that have been written. And one of the ideas that's not a new idea to most people who are into ufology and this kind of stuff is the idea that the Bible actually has hidden messages in it that weren't always hidden. And over time, we forgot what these stories actually represented, meaning we forgot what the original intent of the imagery and the wording were representing. Imagine, if you will, the story Little Red Riding Hood. Now imagine if that story 500 years from now no longer represents the moral of the story is different, or maybe that's not a good example because I'm not like hyper familiar with Little Red Riding Hood right now as I'm talking about this, but or the boy who cried wolf, and the lesson of that story is, don't lie, don't pretend like something bad's happening, Because when something bad does happen or something other is happening, no one's going to believe you when it actually happens. The time that it actually occurs, everyone's going to be like, they're making it up again. That's why they say, don't cry wolf. Now imagine if that story, 1,000 years from now, didn't mean that at all. It meant something else, like don't forget to brush your teeth before you go to bed, or some shit like that. So essentially the idea that stories from the Bible and maybe other classic literature or very old ancient literature, they were stories told to our human ancestors in ways that we could understand, because we could not grasp the totality of the information, of the truth of the existence of reality. And these stories were told, as Watts speculates, from ETs. And yin and yang, it goes back as far as even some of these things of like yin and yang. And that's the positive and the negative cosmons. These particles, they're the foundation of all existence. So there's a negative and there's a positive, two halves to the whole. Although they're not perfectly balanced, apparently. So are these stories passed down from extraterrestrials to ancient human beings, so we can try to better understand our existence and the world in which we live? Because at the time we didn't have microscopes, quantum physics, etc. Are we catching up to the original intent? Are we coming back around to it on our own? I don't know. I was always told that the best lessons you can learn are the ones you learn yourself. Do you ever truly learn a lesson if you don't learn it yourself? I'm not 100% sure you do. Intellectually, we can hold on to an idea, but until we experience it, till we go through it ourselves, do we truly understand what it means? And I think that's what the paranormal is all about. Experiencing is believing when it comes to paranormal stuff. Although scientifically, I guess some people have that kind of brain where if they can see the equation, they can see it, the solution on paper, that can translate to their mind, and therefore it can become real. Because that's all science is. It's on paper, right? And then you can kind of witness it, and you can kind of you can do these experiments. You get the same outcome. You can actually do it in the physical world, but it starts on paper, and sometimes it starts backwards from seeing it and trying to figure out what you saw. And that's where the paranormal is. It's on. We're trying to retrofit our experiences, reverse engineer to understand what happened. Doesn't always work out easily for us, does it? Oh boy. There are many strange manifestations associated with UFOs, and some of them overlap with things we otherwise experience as psychic phenomena. The sudden appearance and disappearance of entities such as Men in Black, which Alan Hilton's friend John encountered in the lane outside Hilton's house, this is referencing something from earlier in the book, are an example of apparently human creatures which just cannot be subject to the same laws of permanency as we are. Often in such encounters, only one entity speaks, as was the case in this story. Certain psychics have been known, when entranced, to materialize whole entities, including people, the spirit effigies being clothed in ectoplasm. This is a form of transitory matter and was named by Professor Charles Richet, an eminent psychical researcher around the beginning of the 20th century. Richet witnessed on several occasions materializations of what he was convinced were living beings and wrote, "A living being or living matter formed under our eyes, which has its proper warmth, apparently a circulation of blood and a physiological respiration, which has also a kind of psychic personality, having a will distinct from the will of the medium, In a word, a new human being. This is surely the climax of marvels. Nevertheless, it is a fact. The lore on materializing entities goes back as far as there are records. Even Socrates believed in sylphs, which are well described as men composed as if it were of air and subject to birth and death. Sylphs, gnomes, undines, and salamanders comprised the four categories of elementals or nature spirits. It was once firmly believed that these elementals could be summoned up by magicians. The Swiss philosopher and physician Paracelsus wrote, "They are beings occupying a place between men and spirits, resembling men and spirits, resembling men and women in their organization and form, and resembling spirits in the rapidity of their locomotion." Elementals, when they die, are said to simply disintegrate back into the matrix from which they emerged, so that no individual consciousness endures. Yet sylphs will have more substance than some of the other misplaced entities that are encountered. See, this is interesting in the way that, doesn't it seem obvious when thinking about it in this way that all of this stuff is deeply intertwined and connected with one another? How do you really separate UFOs, ETs, ghosts, sylphs, gnomes, fairies, Bigfoot, the legend of the black dog, etc.? You start to get into a place where, okay, these are all just like different manifestations of the same thing, right? Or they're somehow related to one another. I'm not saying me and my brother are the same people. Although our DNA is astoundingly similar. But, because we think we have our own minds. We live our own lives. Me and a dog are not the same. We have different ways of living. We have different physical appearances. But are we connected through this consciousness? And whether or not we think the dogs have access to the consciousness level that we have, that's a whole other discussion, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say they do. It's, different doesn't mean better. I think we have to remember that. So I don't know how we get to the bottom of figuring it all out. That's probably the biggest problem that I face in my curiosity is maybe demand is too big of a word, but maybe the demand for answers and the necessity for knowing. Like, what does it all mean, man? Oh, yeah, it all makes sense. Because I go through these things, and I've been going through a lot of like past footage and audio and video as I work on editing together this documentary series that I'm making. And it becomes, not overwhelming to a certain degree, but it becomes like mind-blowing when you try to process your own experiences. And the longer you're away from a paranormal experience, the more difficult it can possibly become to access the feelings, emotions, and thoughts you were experiencing at the time. But certain ones resonate still. Some of them are strong enough, the signal was broadcast loudly enough to where they never quite leave you. Is it important to focus only on those? Or do we have to comb through and try to find the finer details of that experience to gain real insight? I'm not sure I know the answer to that. But I do suspect it's in the totality of the experience itself. And maybe the real lesson or the real information to be gleaned from the experience itself is the effect it has on the person. I know Jim Perry on UFOmet. It's about the human experience, and through the human lens of experience. It does such a great job with that. How do we complete the pie? Because I do feel like there's at least a couple pieces of the pie missing. I don't know about you, but when I eat a pie, I like to eat the whole pie. That's not true. I mean, depending on how hungry I am, I could probably eat a whole pie. Pizza pie, apple pie, pumpkin pie. Those are probably my top 3 pies. Banana cream, actually. I don't want to forget about banana cream. Those are my top 4 pies. Pearson, I'm conflicted. And why am I conflicted? To be honest with you, I'm not even really sure why I'm conflicted. But I mean, conflicted might be too strong of a word. But when we try to understand UFOs, when we try to understand aliens, and we try to understand alchemy, and we try to understand ghosts, and we try to understand Bigfoot, it's like, do we really even need to know? Do we even really need to understand? And once we understand, then what? What's the point after that? And why are we driven to understand? And why do we need to know this? I mean, curiosity is a fickle thing, and my curiosity years ago could have been spiked and lit ablaze by other things. So why was it this world, right? I don't know the answer other than the fact that I had experiences that lit the fuse. I didn't necessarily ask for those experiences, and I never anticipated I'd be in the position I am in today. Never once was I anticipating making a paranormal investigation series. 10 years ago, if you would ask me that, 15, 25 years ago, I mean, I loved all that stuff. It was very enjoyable for me to watch it or to dig into it. But to actually be making that wasn't the dream as a kid. You know what I mean? Sometimes things happen in our lives that forcibly change our path. And by forcibly, I mean we have no choice but to choose to go a different way. Nothing forces us to go a different way other than our choice. And I've made those choices. Why? Because I just couldn't not make that choice each time. It's like an overwhelming urge to explore and to try to figure it out. I think I've talked about this, but there's a couple documentaries I watched. They're part of a series by Chad Kalick, and I'm hoping to get him on the program. Sir No Face, and then there's Two Face, The Gray, and then Phantom Rider. I believe I got the names of those correctly. That's the order in which you should watch them if you're going to watch them. And you'll be interested to see the journey it takes. And it might start to ring a little bit familiar about connectivity between all these things. And you'll start to see that I think it's I don't want to say industry-wide. I think inside the field of people who are fascinated and interested in the paranormal, it seems like a natural progression that we all end up at the same place, that all this shit's connected to one another, and there's truly no real separation. And that's why Bigelow has his Consciousness Study Institute, and he no longer owns Skinwalker Ranch. Who knows what all those other billionaires are working on? But I can guarantee it has something to do with consciousness and trying to understand it, because we still don't understand what consciousness is. I don't think this podcast is going to unlock the key to the secrets of consciousness and its origins. I mean, that's not what we're trying to do. I'm not, we're not 60 Minutes over here doing investigative reports on, the working conditions at GM or something like that. Quite frankly, I don't have the time to dedicate every waking minute of my life to trying to understand what consciousness is. I'm living with consciousness as you are, as you listen to this. I do have other things that I'm trying to, have in my life, I suppose. And maybe that's why I won't unlock it, because I don't have the singular focus where I will unlock the key to consciousness at all costs. I don't have that kind of ambition, maybe. I don't know. What's your ambition? I mean, have you ever thought about, when's the last time you thought about like your level of ambition? And does your level of ambition coincide with that which you have decided to dedicate your life to? And this could be multiple things. It doesn't have to just be one thing. I don't think any of us are just doing one thing anymore. I think we've gotten out of that mindset, that singular mindset. I mean, some people are, I suppose, like maybe professional athletes who are golfers or whatever. They golf every single day of their life since they were 7 to try to be the best. I just don't know if my ambition is high enough to unravel the secrets of consciousness. And there's no shame in that. I don't know. Maybe yours is. That doesn't mean that we can't be fascinated. I mean, there seems to be like a bias against like part-time players. And that bias always comes from full-time players. Meaning people who are fully committed to a thing usually look down upon those who are part-time committed to a thing. So someone who's a stand-up comedian, a paranormal investigator, an app founder, other things, writer, actor, etc. Am I a full-time player in all of these things, or am I a part-time player in all of these things? I don't think I'm a part-time player in any of them. So the question then becomes, do you have time for any of this other stuff? If you are, how can you even be a person, right? Like, do you go out and do you hike the mountain? Do you enjoy some vacation time, et cetera, et cetera? But in the world of paranormal, it can be, the label of expert is often needed for validity, et cetera. I don't think it serves us to be worrying about any of that. And I don't think it's important. The TV industry will tell you otherwise. They need to be able to position you as an expert, so people will watch the show. And sure, I understand that. But when you have someone like Alan Watts, not the Alan Watts that you may already know about, this guy is he was a British UFO researcher. He seems to, have that full-time commitment to this. I mean, the book is ridiculously deep and thorough. And it spans scientific studies all the way to referencing well-known cases like Whitley Strieber, etc. when it comes to abductions. But then the connection between UFOs and these other things like, sylphs, spirits, entities, universal consciousness. That's what I mean when I think all this stuff ends up at the same place at the end of the day. Because I do think we all get there eventually at the end of our journeys. You go deeply into this, you start to understand connections. And I suppose after 630 plus episodes of this podcast, all the different investigations I've been doing over the years, etc., all the consumption of material regarding this or related to in some way that maybe I didn't even anticipate was related when I first started consuming it, you start to realize like all these roads point to Rome, right? And I used to say that a lot about all the different communities that were out on the fringe. They all kind of ended up at the same place in these last 5 years. 6, 7 years maybe now. They've all kind of showed up at the same party, and we're like, oh, I guess the occultists have to introduce themselves to the ufologists, have to introduce themselves to the ghost hunters, have to introduce themselves to the channelers, the mediums, the tarot readers, etc. Conspiracy theorists show up. That always shows up. We all end up at the same place. And I think it's only a matter of time before the people who are even on the quote unquote more mainstream part of this, people just living their lives, they will end up at the same place as well. Because it's a big place. And the name of that place is just our reality. I honestly don't know what's going to happen. Stories of the UFO and otherwise have been so prominent in their rise to the mainstream brain. I honestly don't know. I mean, I really look forward to a day when UFOs and ETs are understood as real and common knowledge. I mean, I do not know what that world looks like, though. As excited as I get thinking about that future, I don't understand the details of that future. How it feels to live in that world. What is the waking reality once we all know that for sure? And by we, I mean the entire world. I mean, I guess you could argue that we over here on this side, and maybe you're more skeptical and just listening to this for fun, so maybe you're not maybe I shouldn't include you in this collective we, or the more specific we here, but I think we already live in this world. So maybe the shift, the change, the acclimation isn't nearly as intense, difficult, drastic, etc. as I might think it could be. But for a lot of people who don't spend any time thinking about this stuff, the adjustment could be, I don't want to say more difficult, and I don't want to say more severe, because those words seem to have negative connotations. Maybe I'll just call it, there's a greater gap to bridge. Do these people easily adapt to the new world that is so different from their previous world because they have spent no time or energy contemplating the possibility that this world could even exist or is even likely in the slightest? Those people might have a more difficult time adjusting to the reality. Because I sometimes wonder, how will I truly adjust once it's acknowledged, once it is accepted as being true and real? And I wish I could tell you. I don't really know because we're not there yet. And as much as I would like to tell you I know exactly how I'll react under any circumstance, I've proven to myself that that's not true over the years. I have been terrified multiple times because of unexplainable things happening. Other times I've handled it quite well with aplomb, and sometimes with a peach. So I can't tell you how I'd react, although I can tell you that I already live in a world that's different than the people who have never considered anything paranormal as being real. You know, because I've had multiple experiences, and if you're listening to this, you probably have as well. That changes our world. It changes our world very drastically. And so in that way, I don't think there's much of a change for me. And maybe that's probably, maybe those are famous last words. That I'll, it wouldn't be the first time I look like a fool saying something and then being proven to be incorrect later. I mean, and it won't be the last, certainly as well. But I just don't know. I can't think about it too long. I can't allow myself, let me rephrase that. I won't allow myself to think about it too long because it's one of those things that can kind of put me into a spin out where I start to feel like nothing is real. I don't know if you know that sensation, but most people could feel it be slightly familiar when the same word is said too often in a conversation and you have to stop saying the word, man. Yeah, stop saying the word. It's lost all meaning. So does everything lose all meaning when we think about it way too long? Which is an interesting concept by itself, I think. The idea that we can perceive something to lose its meaning through repetition or through whatever other reason, it shows us the fluidity, the changeability, the tenuous nature of meaning itself. So if meaning, if definition can be so tenuous, what does that leave us with? And some people will say, well, it leaves us with fact. It leaves us with truth. Leaves us with reality. But even reality, that word, has meaning. I'm not going to sit here and say reality, reality over and over and over and over and over again to see if we all lose sense of it. But it is interesting to think about. I mean, I'm so torn from day to day, from one side to the other on certain issues, like Bob Lazar. I'm so torn on Bob Lazar. And I certainly can't be the only person who's like this. When you're like, well, some of the stuff he said is just, there's just, he had to know. And then on the other side, it's like, well, how come they couldn't find one person who said they went to school with him at MIT? There's no evidence whatsoever that he went to MIT. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, how did he know this? And how did he know some of this stuff so many years ago that scientists are now saying are likely ways in which human beings could theoretically travel through space-time? It's, you know what I mean? Nothing is cut and dry. Nothing in this world seems so easy, right? The only thing that seems easy is understanding our own experience when we have them. And even that becomes super complicated in many different aspects. So I'm torn on that. That's just one example of many things in this world that I'm torn on. I'd love to just shut my brain off on all this stuff and like go back to living like a normal life or whatever. That's just not an option. You don't get to do that. I mean, I could do that, I guess, but clearly I don't really want to. What's the fun in that? But it all boils down to the fact that we all want answers. We all want to understand. We all want simple. We want it to be clear. We want to be able to exhale a sigh of relief in understanding that what is has been explained and is understandable. Because it's difficult to understand quantum physics principles and equations. It's difficult, if not impossible, for most of us to come to a place in our life where we have such a deep, intimate knowledge of that stuff that it's secondhand nature to understand it. Most of us don't have the time for that. And that seems to be, when it comes to understanding the phenomena, especially of UFOs and travel through space-time, this far out, super advanced scientific knowledge seems to be the key to even understanding the possibility of these things in any real way. Although I would argue that I have zero comprehension about how a car works. I know that I either have to have a battery charged, or I have to have gasoline inside of it, or diesel. And I turn the key and it works, or I push the button and it works. I don't understand how I get from my house to a comedy club inside that vehicle. So do I even need to understand how an alien would get from their planet to our planet in their automobile? Or how I could go from my planet to their planet in a vehicle? I don't even understand how the vehicle that I have here works. So why do I need to know how that vehicle would work? So maybe I just overthought this whole thing, and it doesn't matter at all, potentially. Nonetheless, trying to understand the possibility of something that has not been presented on a wide scale as being real, factual part of our reality is difficult, because then it becomes, a speculation carnival. You can go to the Conscious Life Expo. You can go to any of these things, these big events where a bunch of different people will speak and talk, and you'll have different people renting booths telling you that they're talking to this person who's a source or a channel, and et cetera, et cetera. You've got all these different people. It's a carnival of thought, right? And it's so like, who are you going to believe? Who are you going to give your money to? And who are you going to try to win some tickets from? Are you going to try to, you're going to really try to wrap your brain around it? And if so, who are you going to put your money on that actually has the information? And usually the person we put our money on connects with us in a personal way that is either profound or unexplainable. Maybe it's predicting future events in your own life. And this person was so right. There's no way they could have known this information. And they're also now saying this other stuff about the world. So that also must be true. A was true, so B must be true, right? That's usually how it happens. There has to be a small miracle. And we talk about this we see this play out when it comes to cult leaders. When cult leaders cement their status, it is usually through a performance of a small miracle. Maybe medium or large miracle as well, but a small miracle will be performed at least once that cements their status in the people's minds as they have access to, or they actually are beyond regular human capabilities. That they have been touched, or that they are a vessel, or that they are the chosen for the message, etc. Those miracles take many different forms. But if you can perform a miracle, or at least the perception of a miracle, now you've got your status solidified. So when psychics can tell us things about ourselves that no one could have predicted, like about our future, those are profound moments. Those are small miracles. So if that person is now telling you something about the end of the world, you're probably going to believe them. If some guru can essentially on cue show you something, melt your reality, manifest an entity, something like that, they can tell you what they're going to do. That seems impossible. And then they do it. You experience that thing. essentially immediately after they say they're going to help you see this thing or experience this thing, you don't think, yeah, that's probably not real. Boom, then it happens. They've cemented their status in your mind as being something other than just a meat suit, right? Who poops and eats. Now they've been touched by God or are capable of miraculous things. They have the key to unlock the cosmic door. And if that person tells you you need to stop talking to your family if you truly want to ascend, you're probably like, well, that doesn't sound great. That doesn't sound like you should be doing that. But they showed me this thing that's so much bigger than life itself. I got to buy in, I suppose. So I think that's how that happens. I don't even know how I got over here talking about this. And by over here, I mean on this subject. So when you have all these, the Carnival of Thought. So you have all these different barkers at the Carnival of Thought, telling you that they have the answer. They have access. They're the ones with the communication with the aliens or the source or the universal consciousness and things like that. And so there's different narratives that play out. And then you have filmmakers who are investigators, and they're doing the damnedest. They're doing their damnedest to try to uncover what actually is true. And it turns out at the end of the day, and I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, that there are so many different multiple variations of the truth potentially. And the reason I can't believe I'm saying this is because I, just as much as anyone, I want a singular truth. I want to know, okay, this is what that is. And this is what that means. We can all agree on that, right? But if we open ourselves up to the idea that there can be multiple variations of what that truth is, there can be multiple truths coexisting together in harmony of some kind, which doesn't seem fucking possible, but for the sake of this thought exercise, let's agree that it does. Maybe that's what we have to open up ourselves to. And that just seems wild. It doesn't even make any sense, to be quite frank. So you got all these different things and all these different people telling you all these different scenarios that are unfolding amongst you and to you, right? The secret space program, the super secret space program, the fake alien invasion coming, the real alien invasion coming. Aliens would never invade. All of it's fake. None of it's real. There's no such thing as aliens. The lights go out when you die. There's nothing else. No, consciousness lives on forever, and that manifests itself as spirits and as ghosts. Then you got me telling you that consciousness manifests itself as Bigfoot, as ghosts, as aliens. All these. I mean, at the end of the day, none of it makes any sense, really. But you have all these things happening at once here in the Carnival of Thought, and I suppose you're at my booth right now because you're listening to this. But I want you to know, as one of the barkers, as one of the booth owners at the Carnival of Thought, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that what I'm telling you is the truth. I don't know. I'm trying to figure all this out too, you know what I mean? I'm just a guy who kind of like maybe lucked into a booth at this thing. And maybe luck's not even the right word, but we're going to try to figure it out the best we can. So at least we can feel like we're in arm's reach of understanding. I don't need to grasp onto the thing and hold it tightly, but it'd be nice to at least have it in the sights to feel like you might be able to reach it. Or even be able to see it, right? That's a thing. That would be nice. Maybe you're not even close to being able to reach it, but at least you can see the thing you can't reach. That'd be nice. And the thing is obviously truth and understanding. I mean, we know the manifestations of that as like UFOs, aliens, etc., ghosts. That's the thing, kind of, right? But that's not, I'm talking about the truth of it all, not the manifestations of the truth, which would be Bigfoot, ghosts, aliens, etc. Does that make sense to you? Universal consciousness is what ties it all together for me. And whether it's etheric or source, spirit, whatever it is, soul clusters, it's surrounding us. And psychic abilities, all this other phenomena becomes very possible, if not even plausible, when you understand, or when you lean into the idea, not when you understand, that idealism is much more likely than materialism. And as you know, I am an idealist, and I believe that consciousness is a foundation, and then physical matter emanates from that. Our perception of what the physical world is enough to make it real, because thoughts create physical structures which can be measured by scientific and medical devices. These are physical structures that are measurable by devices that are created by thought. So indeed, our thoughts create the world around us. 100%, as far as I'm concerned. And so understanding that makes everything possible, because you can think it, you can be it. Right? Okay. I think we did it today. RyanSingerComedy.com is the website. Tour dates for this summer are on there. Information, updates, all that good stuff will be coming your way. If you haven't downloaded Crystallize app, please do that today. Android or iPhone. Write a 5-star review. Send me a screenshot of the 5-star review. You'll be entered into our giveaways. We're giving away stuff for people who write a 5-star review and send us the screenshot of it. Thank you if you've already downloaded. We appreciate your support. Give me a follow on social media at Rysing, Rysing, Instagram and Twitter. Crystallize app on all social media. I hope you love yourself. You should. I love you. You deserve it. We all do. We all do. We all deserve it. I guess that's it. So if I don't see you later this summer on the road doing stand-up comedy, I hope to see you at the watering hole on the astral plane.